The mining legislation in the Yukon really needs to be updated. We haven't seen a substantial and appropriate update since the early 1900s.
Tonight, all that glitters is not gold. Not everyone is on board with the Yukon Territory's revamped mining legislation.
If those people had more context, more knowledge of that call, more knowledge of him, man, that would have went down so much differently.
And Rodney Levi was shot and killed by an RCMP officer last summer, but family and community members are saying his death could have been prevented. Good evening and welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. Mark Miller gave a press conference today renewing federal commitment to lifting all long-term water advisories in Canada. Although they are not giving specific dates, as Jamie Pashagumscom reports, they are promising to be more transparent.
Indigenous Services Canada gave a progress update on water advisories. They say since 2015, 101 long-term boil water advisories have been lifted.
The work doesn't stop once advisories are lifted. We're also making investments in expanding water infrastructure and operations, in maintenance and training programs to ensure we never find ourselves in this situation again.
But the Liberal government was unable to make good on its 2015 election promise to have all water advisories fixed by now. And Miller declines to provide a new deadline. Rather, he announced the launching of a new website where Canadians can check the various stages of water projects by community.
The information here goes beyond long-term tracking drinking water advisory. It also includes details on why communities face long-term drinking water advisories, the process involved in lifting an advisory, the status of each project, and the work required to keep water systems running and staffed.
Opposition critics are not impressed. In a statement, the NDP's Charlie Angus says, the best thing that Minister Miller can come up with is the promise of a new website? This is ridiculous. While Gary Vidal of the Conservative Party says Miller's announcement is an acknowledgement that the Liberal government's lack of a plan is the reason for another broken promise. A website is not a strategy, nor a solution. Miller says COVID restrictions have slowed projects, and he hopes increased transparency about that and other challenges can offset the lack of a new deadline, as well as show progress.
We are pretty confident that we can get that construction season back with the additional investments to communities and then be down really to the short strokes.
Miller also confirmed that while some water treatment projects may be completed, the final decision of lifting a water advisory falls on that particular First Nation. Jamie Pashagumscom, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Months before a Mi'kmaq man was fatally shot during a wellness check, he tried to get mental health treatment. According to his family, he was turned away numerous times. Now, a warning, self-harm is discussed in this story, as Angel Moore reports.
He just wanted to do good things in life.
Becky Levi says her uncle Rodney Levi loved his family. He lived with Becky, helping to take care of her two sons. But Rodney died last year, and Becky says the mental health system let him down.
Even if I would have just taken him seriously, some of the times at the hospital, things could have been so differently. Like, he wanted to get help. He wanted to be a better person.
48-year-old Rodney of Metapanagiag First Nation was fatally shot June 12, 2020 by an RCMP officer during a wellness check, 1 week after an Edmonton police officer shot and killed Chantel Moore during a wellness check. Brad McMillan of Natawaganee First Nation is an ex-RCMP officer. He grew up with Rodney.
If those people had more context, more knowledge of that call, more knowledge of him, man, that would have went down so much differently. I know that, and there's nothing, I don't really care what anybody else says to me. That's what I believe, and I believe that wholeheartedly.
Becky said Rodney tried numerous times to get mental health treatment at the Miramichi Hospital in New Brunswick. She said even an instance of self-harm was not enough to get him long-term treatment.
He went to the hospital, I'm not sure if it was 3 or 4 times, and they they had sent him home, and the last time he went, he was walking up the driveway and found a sharp rock piece of glass and slit his wrists, so they would take him serious and actually put him in the psych ward.
The government of New Brunswick recently announced a new addictions and mental health care plan, a 5-year plan to increase services. But there's no mention of specific services for Indigenous mental health care. 2 weeks before Rodney died, he was accepted into a long-term treatment center, but it was online.
He said, I told them that, doing it on the internet isn't going to help. I need one-on-one, like face-to-face help.
Becky eventually did get a call that the treatment center had an in-person opening for Rodney, but Rodney had already been dead for 5 months. If you are experiencing any thoughts of self-harm, please call the First Nations and Inuit Hope for Wellness helpline at the number listed on your screen. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Jabuktuk, also known as Halifax.
A blockade put up by activists who say they are fighting to save old-growth forests on Vancouver Island will be allowed to continue for another 3 weeks. About 150 people rallied outside the BC Supreme Court in Victoria in support of stopping old-growth logging. Logging company Teal Jones filed for an injunction to remove the blockades near Port Renfrew. Some have been up for 7 months. Yesterday, the BC Supreme Court granted a 3-week adjournment the protesters' legal team was seeking to build their defense.
Enough time to respond to all that, given the 2 weeks, so she granted an extension. We're here till it ends. Like, you can't stop this movement. It's just going to keep going.
Last week, the Saskatoon Star-Phoenix reported that the James Smith First Nation was approached by a third party and offered to purchase 1 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine. In that report, AstraZeneca said they have heard multiple reports of such occurrences and said they're, quote, likely not a legitimate offer. Today, Mark Miller warned that only vaccines secured by federal government should be trusted and confirmed the police have been informed.
I would take this opportunity to make it as clear to anyone that's listening that anyone purporting to be an agent of Indigenous Services Canada, that is a private company and not someone that is a member of the public service, should be looked on with great skepticism and indeed great reticence.
The Yukon is currently leading Canada in COVID vaccinations. 25% of the territory's adult population has been fully vaccinated out of its 75% goal. Now, the territorial government says it's looking to ease COVID restrictions by late spring. A new reopening strategy is looking to gradually reduce restrictions depending on vaccination numbers and case counts. Reopening measures could include introducing jurisdictional bubbles and increasing social gathering numbers. So far, 43% of the adult population has received their first COVID-19 vaccination. There are currently no active cases of COVID-19 in the territory. We have to take a short break, but coming up, people in the Northwest Territories are calling for more measures in place to ensure safer taxi rides. A video has been circulating on social media showing a violent confrontation between a Winnipeg security officer and an Indigenous disabled man who was panhandling. Here's that story.
Leave him alone, he'll go away.
In this video, captured by a bystander, a security officer from 494 Security Services can be seen getting rough with Brian McKay, who is disabled. In a written statement, the security firm said the Northgate Mall had requested a trespass order be reinforced to what they called a known and habitual trespasser. Security arrived and asked McKay to leave, and when he did not, they tried to detain him. Their statement said, quote, "The person involved resisted the arrest, striking at security on multiple occasions in a resistive, assaultive manner." McKay says he was not aggressive when security first approached him. In the video, he does swing at the officer, but he says he was trying to protect himself.
At first, I was panhandling there, and then out of nowhere, he just came in front and asked me what I was trying to do. And was sitting there, and he didn't give me time to leave the situation where I was at, sitting at the spot there.
McKay suffers from spina bifida, a condition he's had since birth. When he was 14, McKay was shoved into a burning shed by some other kids. That incident was traumatic for both McKay and his grandmother, Elsie Moore. Moore was shocked when she saw this video of her grandson.
I just started to shake. My chest was sore. My stomach, my whole thing I was shaky. And I think I almost had a breakdown there. I was so shocked at what I seen.
When the confrontation began, 2 bystanders tried to intervene. 494 Security said in a statement, quote, "Bystanders were observed approaching the incident in an escalating manner." Byron Linus shot the video on his phone and says he decided to intervene to prevent McKay from getting hurt.
Well, if there was an investigation, they would see exactly what happened, and that's me de-escalating the situation. If I had not got out of that vehicle, he would have had his knee probably on Brian's back. Brian would have been in cuffs. Brian would have been in the back of that security car.
Now, 494 Security said an investigation was completed and the act was deemed lawful under the Criminal Code of Canada and the Manitoba Petty Trespass Act. Now, APTN asked 494 if the officer would face any discipline, but we're told all relevant information could be found in their statements. Now, Moore and McKay said they have no intentions of filing any complaints or charges as they both just want to move on from this incident. Daryl Stranger, APTN National News, Winnipeg. Over the years, APTN has shared stories about racism in taxi cabs. The Northwest Territories is no different, with patrons calling for more measures to be put in place to ensure safe rides. Our reporter Charlotte Moore-Jacobs brings us that story.
Lana Lewis enjoys her weekly visits to the Arctic Indigenous Wellness Camp in Yellowknife. And she usually takes a cab. But she says on March 1st, she called Aurora Taxi for a ride from the camp, and things immediately turned ugly.
As soon as I got into the cab, he was putting down natives and saying we don't work and we're on crack.
Lewis says the 5-minute commute was cut short when he turned here, reached across her, opened the door, and told her to leave. She was not yet fully out of the car before it began moving, and Lewis's hand and leg were injured.
He opened my passenger door. He told me to get out. As I was getting out, he dragged me. I let go of the cab. He was gone.
Lewis says she called RCMP, who took a statement and photographed her injured hands and leg before dropping her off at the hospital. Lewis is one of many in the North who are sharing their experiences using taxis. Last month, Deanna Jumbo shared her negative experience using a Yellowknife cab in this Facebook post.
As soon as he started asking the real personal questions, I kind of shut him down. I looked at him really mean and I was like, can you just stop? And then he kind of got quiet for the rest of the ride. And then when he dropped me off at my friend's hotel, he kind of waited for me.
Her story gained traction. The Status of Women Council, NWT, launched an anonymous taxi safety survey where patrons and cab drivers could share experiences and make recommendations.
We noticed the post, a woman who shared her experience of sexual harassment in a cab as a warning to other women. And then there were so many responses from women across the North, and we thought that we needed to pay attention. But
Executive Director Louise Elders says Status of Women are currently compiling the data from the survey. A meeting is scheduled with the city's mayor to discuss the issues, and a final report with recommendations will be released to the public this month.
It unfortunately confirmed our suspicions, and there were some situations that, as a layperson, to me seemed criminal in nature, which is really sad.
APTN National News requested an interview with the cab company involved in Lewis's incident and reached out to RCMP for comment on the investigation status, but did not hear back from either by airtime.
I'd like them to be all brought out, and for people like that to be justice against them.
Charlotte Moore-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
All right, thanks for that, Charlotte. We have to take one more break, but stay with us. Our photo of the day is coming up. Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. This little bundle of joy, Avis Sandra Annette Bomberry, is today's photo of the day. Little Avis is her mommy's medicine, muse, and future voice, and in our opinion, she looks super adorable. That's just so cute. We want to see your photos, and you can send them to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Over in the East Coast, +8 in a mix of sun and cloud in Charlottetown, and +11 in Halifax. -10 in Nain, and +4 in Happy Valley, Goose Bay. +8 in Quebec City, and +12 in Montreal. +18 in clouds in Toronto, and +19 in Sarnia. -2 in snow in Wawa, and +4 in snow in Thunder Bay. -22 in a mix of sun and cloud in Churchill, and -12 in Norway House. -4 in a mix of sun and cloud in Winnipeg, and -7 in snow in Dauphin. 0 degrees in Swift Current, and -5 in Saskatoon. -4 in sun in Buffalo Narrows, and -13 in Stony Rapids. And in the west, 0 degrees in Fort McMurray, and +1 in Peace River. +2 in sun in Red Deer, and +5 in sun in Medicine Hat. +12 in sunshine in Vancouver, and +9 in Campbell River. 2 degrees in snow in Smithers, and -1 in Fort Nelson. -3 in snow in Whitehorse, and -9 in snow in Dawson. -12 in snow in Yellowknife, and +2 in Fort Simpson. -14 in snow in Colville Lake, and -12 in Fort McPherson. -29 in sun in Chesterfield, and -27 in Baker Lake. -19 in a mix of sun and cloud in Clyde River, and -22 in snow in Arctic Bay. Mineral development in the Yukon is getting a major overhaul. An independent panel is modernizing archaic mineral legislation, ensuring First Nations rights and territories are protected. While most First Nations are on board with the project, some organizations are worried the strategy is far too ambitious. Here's Sarah Connors with that story.
Since the Klondike Gold Rush, prospectors have essentially been allowed to stake a mining claim anywhere in the Yukon, including places like White River First Nation territory. The First Nations Lands and Resource Manager says many mineral claims have been staked in White River territory without proper consultation or approval.
The mining legislation in the Yukon really needs to be updated. We haven't seen a substantial and appropriate update since the early 1900s.
Now, this new mineral development strategy is hoping to shape the future of mining in the territory. Released late last year, the strategy contains 79 sweeping recommendations aimed at improving mining practices for all Yukoners, especially Yukon First Nations, who often have benefited little from mining in the past.
We could do more damage than by not taking action.
Mathia Alatini is part of an independent panel that wrote the strategy. It was formed by the Yukon government and Yukon First Nations. She says mining is the territory's largest industry, and it's time for new and improved legislation.
When you think of the legacy effect that mineral development can have on Yukoners, not just this generation, but future generations, it is imperative that Yukoners take a look at this.
Recommendations include installing progressive reclamation policies, ensuring First Nations receive fair financial returns while modernizing the free entry system, which means virtually anywhere in the Yukon can be staked unless it has been specifically withdrawn by government legislation. It's something White River says is a move in the right direction.
They were essentially saying that online staking may be a useful tool to curtail the whole issue with free entry staking. We're hopeful that that might be a nice change.
I would say that, the timelines, they're unreal. They're unrealistic.
Ed Pert is the president of the Yukon Chamber of Mines. He agrees that the strategy is good for the Yukon. However, he's concerned its goal to quickly replace the governing mining acts is unreasonable because it typically takes years to do so.
To amend them in 2 to 3 years, it's not going to happen. We've had other acts amended in this territory that have taken far longer to amend. So I really do think it's going to be challenging for industry and for mining if it goes through as is.
But Alatini says it can and must be done.
We can't afford to continue to have this uncertainty swirling around everything in land use, mineral development, governance, all of it.
Final recommendations for the strategy will be submitted at the end of this month for the Yukon First Nations and the Yukon government to review. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
It's a story too often told. Indigenous people treated badly at a hospital. On today's In Focus's episode, host Melissa Ridgen discussed racism in the healthcare system. A report on the issue was recently conducted in BC by Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond. She found 88% of Indigenous people interviewed had personally experienced racism and discrimination from healthcare professionals.
Well, and I have to give a trigger warning because your listeners are going to be familiar with these concepts. Yeah. But the stereotypes, the pernicious stereotypes that I think people like my parents' generation faced, and they're still there. So these were the top stereotypes in BC, and maybe they're worse elsewhere. Maybe they're the same. I don't know. But, that First Nations and Métis are less worthy, drinkers or alcoholics, drug seeking. A lot of attitudes that First Nations and Métis parents are bad parents because of all the negative information in the healthcare system from the child welfare system. That First Nations are frequent flyers. That was a phrase, frequent flyers in the emergency room. And the thing is, the reason why First Nations people are in the emergency room is they don't have primary care. So what are they supposed to do? Get no care? Then they're labeled we have a frequent flyer here. And that's it's kind of dehumanizing to somehow blame people for the fact that they're trying to get care in the only door they can get that care. And I know emergency rooms are stressed in the pandemic, but then they're not treated as well in the emergency room. And there's a lot of hostile and abusive interaction. So the stereotypes were really profound, and the stereotypes drive what I call abusive interactions, verbal, physical abuse, security getting called, and sometimes medical mistakes, ignoring and shunning people. So this has impacted the health and well-being of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people for a long time.
And I will be hosting a special sports episode next week on In Focus. I will be in Melissa Ridgen's chair, and I'll talk with Ted Nolan about his experiences with racism in the NHL. And that's all the time we have for this edition of APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. Have a great night.